afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming today. So as Matthew is gracious enough to mention, I am at Red Hat, the Open Source and Standards team, which is Red Hat's fancy way of saying Open Source Programs Office. In the past, I've been the head of developer relations at a couple of different startups, and I originally got my start doing community engagement work at Google in their Open Source Programs Office once a long time ago.
And my name is Laura Czajkowski. I am the Senior Community Developer Manager at Couchbase. In my past lives, I have been involved in different open source projects, getting involved from university, running our computer society, to getting more involved in the open source different communities and working in Canonical and Launchpad. And my job at Couchbase then is to look after the event strategy, our messaging for our developer community, working on our meetup groups, and running our experts and champions and community writers programs.
Excellent, and as Matthew has already mentioned, Laura and I are collaborating on Leslie Laura Live, and we are actually live today instead of pretending to be live and typing at you. So this is our collaboration to just participate in the DevRel conversation, helping to answer questions from people who may be newer and just to share our thoughts and experience. So we aren't pressuring ourselves to post too much or to be super active on social media just because we have day jobs. So if you don't hear from us right away, it's not that we don't love you, but please do follow along, and hopefully we will share things that are valuable to you, or potentially if you'd like to write about something that's valuable to you, we'd also like to share it. So without further ado, when Laura and I were preparing this presentation, we thought long and hard about how we could give folks in the audience a use case-driven example of an incredibly effective community outreach strategy in just 20 minutes. And it turns out we had both had personal experience, in Laura's case much deeper than mine, with this particular project, the Ubuntu project.
So as I mentioned, I got involved in the open source community in college. I was helping to run a computer society, but I hadn't really fully experienced an open source community. So when I moved to Dublin, I knew absolutely nobody. It's a bit daunting. And I worked for a small software testing house. And it was quite boring. And I stumbled along to a Linux user group. And they told me about LUGs, or loco teams. And at that point in time, I got exposed to the Ubuntu community. And I thought it was actually fascinating, really, that there was a way for me to be made welcome and part of something bigger, to be exposed to a different culture, to meet new people worldwide that weren't just in Ireland. And it was a fantastic way. And from that point in time, it just really catapulted me to getting involved in Ubuntu, from being an Ubuntu member to the Ubuntu membership board, loco teams, and eventually the community council. And I've been very fortunate in that time to basically meet some fantastic people, some of whom are even here today, that I would never have had the experience of meeting before in my life outside of the open source communities. And I think Ubuntu did a great job of showcasing how you can get involved in a community, and many other communities out there have learned an awful lot from how they've done it.
Yeah, my first involvement with the Ubuntu project was back in 2006 when I was part of the team hosting the first Ubuntu Developer Summit to be held in the United States. Actually, as a result of that, I was voted an Ubuntu community member, which was pretty groovy, and I also started using Linux full-time because I felt like it was something that was accessible to me, because these folks were insisting that, in fact, Ubuntu was Linux for human beings. So I run Fedora and RHEL now, and I have some feelings about how community outreach has happened in the Ubuntu community following on from our use case tour, but we have a support group for that, and we meet at the drink station downstairs during the break. But here we go. Let's talk about canonical strategy with Ubuntu. First, does anyone recognize this image? Oh my goodness. Yes, ma'am. The Portland Airport carpet. Thank you. I love it. So, for reasons that are unknown to me, but as a former Portlander, so deeply nostalgic, people love to take pictures with the Portland Airport carpet. So that's why this image is for our explanation of the canonical strategy, carpet bomb the world, which may be a little not PC, but definitely covers the point. Any folks here from marketing? Okay, so I bet all of you are thinking pray and spray right now. That's okay. This is not quite pray and spray that we're talking about. This is, it's something a little bit different, but again, we'll cover that later.
So Ubuntu's released back in 2004, and of course Mobile at that stage didn't really know about it. So in order to spread the word, Canonical actually hired some very well-known, very well-connected and respected Linux community members to tell the story of this distribution worldwide at Linux user groups. From those major cities like New York, Boston, Sydney, everywhere to smaller little user groups like the likes of Wolverhampton. And, you know, it got its name out there in a phenomenal way that it actually hadn't seen other communities do. So they were very smart. They hired key people who got in front of audiences worldwide to educate them and get people excited about it. And they did a job that many of us actually still continue to use those methods because of such a great job they did.
Yeah, and suddenly, from zero to the project was everywhere, along with its tagline, Linux for human beings. So if you're taking a look at this Google Trends graph, we can see we go from zero to hero pretty darn quickly. And again, this is all because of some very intense, upfront strategic work done by Canonical to understand not just the potential users for their product, but also like overall the strategic marketplace. So this inflection point is when we're first starting to see that companies are building up billion-dollar businesses with a B built upon the LAMP stack. So here, Canonical is coming out and putting in front of a group of people who traditionally, the Linux user group scene had been incredibly vibrant several years earlier with things like, you know, return your Microsoft license, et cetera. Those days are behind us now. But at one point, that had been kind of the flashpoint, focal point for the Linux user group community. And after a while, they didn't, you know, they were still meeting, they were still talking tech. They weren't as invigorated and as excited. So along comes Canonical and drops, boom, brand new shiny distro, Ubuntu, into the Linux user group community all over the place with a strong call to action that you should just join the community and get more people involved using Linux, which had a great deal of appeal to the audience that they were reaching out to.
Yeah, so they did that an awful lot of the way by actually targeting home users. If you're able to admin it at home for your family, your friends, because we've all been in that position where we've been asked to fix the computer for your parent, for your family, for your relative. You arrive to somebody's house for Sunday dinner and you get told, could you fix my computer? So many people then started to install Ubuntu on their family, friends, laptops because they started to experience it. And actually it was a great way of actually spreading the word, because if you think about it, what we often do at home is we try things out at the weekend and you go back into your workplace at work and you start talking about things that you've just learned and played with. And that's the same way that you talk about any new project or potential tool that you're going to use in the workplace nowadays. You play with it the weekend, you go back in, you talk about it at the lunch break, and you potentially look at using this for your next project. And that's a great way of actually advocating the use of a new project, a new tool. And for those of us that are just looking to get something excited, I mean, it was a great way to actually, you know, encourage children to use these tools, because you were able to like give a brand new laptop to a kid with a refresh of Ubuntu, expose them to new tools and technologies. And, you know, you saw people like getting excited with the likes of Minecraft, you know, so it rejuvenated a lot of new people in getting excited about things.
And again, in this same environment, you know, we're seeing a great deal of interest in the LAMP stack and an appeal to folks in the Linux, which, you know, obviously is the L in LAMP stack, at a time when suddenly there's a huge demand for professional talent in this area, jobs for Linux, at the same time as we see this growth curve for Linux for human beings suddenly shot up if you take a look at the Linux Foundation jobs report. And then came the cloud. And we all know what happened there. So it's worth noting that, again, talking about like having a holistic strategic vision for community outreach, Canonical is also targeting a group of very vocal, passionate advocates in the Linux user group community at a time when not only are their skills becoming more highly valued as developers, but as new technologies that will be built out on top of that Linux distro foundation are suddenly becoming available. So you know, if you are at home, as Laura mentioned, in your lab trying something out, chances are that you're trying out the shiny new cloud hotness on your shiny new distro hotness, which leads to all kinds of benefits for the company behind the distribution, right? People who are contributing documentation, tutorials, doing translation work, who are putting on community events to get more people using the software are effectively contributing to your corporate bottom line because all of these wonderful new technologies are being deployed on top of their distribution. And where are all of the how-tos, guides, things to get people up to speed on these brand new technologies? They're reliant upon someone using your Linux distribution because otherwise this tutorial or help is not useful to them.
Yeah, and so by doing deep engagement with the community and incentivizing a clear narrative, they found it very compelling. Getting Linux into the hands of the human beings, that was really their tagline, and that's what they actually went out to achieve and succeed. Canonical saw large contributions in the form of documentation, tutorials, translations, key ways that people could get involved. So if you weren't a developer, and many people aren't always developers, but do want a way to get involved, they found that there were people out there who had different skill sets and is putting it to use. The same way could be seen about any project right now, right? So not everybody is a developer. Some people have a soft skill set. Maybe it's software testing, maybe it's documentation, maybe it's actually helping them get involved in running events. And it's a way they provided for people to get involved. And Ubuntu was very successful in this way. And I might think particularly about OpenStack. They've been very successful pulling on many of the ways in which Ubuntu did it. And I think that they've also followed on and been very successful.
Yeah, I think it was the first reference operating system for OpenStack. Yeah.
So what did we learn today? There's actually quite a lot of lessons to be learned, but we're going to distill it down to 7 key takeaways for this talk.
There were a whole bunch of different forces at play that allowed this particular strategy to be so incredibly successful, right? So there were people aspects, right? A group of people who are excited, passionate, and maybe a little bit bored, who will be very happy to take your shiny new distribution for a test drive. We had an increasing influence of that technology in the market, as well as that being the foundational technology for yet another offering, as we're seeing a paradigm shift away from typical data center operations to cloud computing. And we're also seeing the forces of being able to harness a community of folks worldwide by getting them to be excited about a single story, which is about software freedom and spreading the love of Linux. So by actually being able to tap into having an effective strategy that understood that talking to people about cloud technologies was deeply important, meeting developers where they were at strategic events was important, they were able to achieve huge mind share in a matter of, we went from 0 to everyone's using it in 2 years.
So in order to do this, they actually had a clear call to action and a clear contributor pathway. So this was quite key, actually. And many projects don't actually do this very well. So what they did was they made it, they created a roadmap, a way for you to get involved. It was that through the Ubuntu Developer Summits, you got given action items, you were made feel part of something. And by making a contributor or a developer part of something, they will actually get more involved. They'll want to take part in it. They'll also want to give up their free time and to take part in something great because they're feeling that they can actually make a change, make a difference. And Ubuntu did this very well. So even if it was simply join and contribute on the Loco team, on the IRC mailing list, there was tons of places where they could get involved and they were made feel welcome. And that's kind of key. If you don't make people feel welcome, they're not likely to stay around. So clear pathway and being made feel welcome, I think, were one of the key takeaways.
Anyone know the inside joke for this? And if you're Matthew, you're not allowed to answer? Okay, excellent. I will tell the inside joke. So the inside joke, when many people were trying to analyze why Ubuntu was so successful as a project and why Canonical as a company had so much success in getting Ubuntu into the hands of so many Linux users, people often argued that it was solely or largely because the founder of Canonical, Mark Shuttleworth, had done so well in the acquisition of his prior startup that he had just deep pockets, so deep in fact that he even sent himself to space. So, when your company founder is an astronaut, apparently all things are possible. So I promised you that we would come back to Pray and Spray. Here we are. Mega budgets are super awesome. They don't exist. Let's be honest with ourselves. And I think this is a particularly important thing to remember for folks who are operating in an environment where you have VC backing. It's very early in your company's history. You need to understand how you can effectively target your market, with a minimum viable product. And yet you need to be able to do that cost effectively because you may have a wonderful budget now, but if you're not able to quickly provide return on investment, you'll find those budgets shrinking and yourself looking at the job board downstairs, which may or may not be good for you.
Which brings us on to this, spend wide and shallow. And I'd never really heard about this expression until Leslie and myself started thinking about this conversation. So what it actually means is you can't spend massive amounts of budgets everywhere. Not everybody has an unlimited budget. You need to spend it wisely. And that comes back down to thinking about your company goals and objectives. So what Ubuntu did in this case was they decided to hit lots of large user groups, the Linux user groups everywhere. There's an awful lot that you can do with like a round the world ticket. You could piggyback on friends' couches. You could be very strategic in the way you want to get in front of people. So how you bring that back in today's conversations is that if you wanted to target key cities, perhaps it's New York, perhaps it's Boston, perhaps it's Munich or Paris, going to those cities and picking on user groups and trying to arrange it in advance and getting in front of 2 or 3 user groups in 1 week is far much more better for you and beneficial than flying to one city once a week for 6 weeks straight. You're not going to have any life, you're not going to have any type of downtime, and it's not good for you, and it's very, very expensive. So think about where you're going to spend that money. Invest wisely, because you will have to show return, and that's what all of us end up having to do, is showing where we're spending our budgets at the end of the day. So you need to think about your strategic goals and objectives. So planning out your budget 6 months out in advance and planning out your strategy of your travel and your engagement makes things an awful lot better for you, for your team, and for your organization.
Excellent. So I'm going to tell a story here. So another thing that was key was that folks who were promoting Ubuntu were meeting people where they were, right? So again, Linux users groups worldwide, small cities, big cities, whatever. This guy named Jeff Waugh literally like went around the world and somehow managed to hit everybody in one go. I still don't know how he did it. And the key here was there was already an audience, they were receptive to the message. That was great. In contrast, I have worked at companies before who were convinced that the key to building a center of gravity with the developer community was to create a website that would compete with meetup.com because meetup.com did not give us sufficient data for our sales force, so clearly we should make our own. That didn't happen, and I was really happy about it. So again, use existing structures. Another example of a project that I think has done this really well is Ansible. I have to put this in because I love Robin Bergeron, and she is the Ansible on Twitter. So again, the Ansible project grew quickly, and then again, there was a company formed. And in order to get the word out about Ansible, folks weren't just going to Ansible meetups. They were very happy to go to DevOps meetups, monitoring meetups, attend conferences like DevOps Days, Monitorama, to meet people where they were and to very specifically not preach to the choir. So again, use your existing structures. Don't think that you have to like land and expand and make your own meetup and like have your own user conference in the first 15 minutes of your company. Like, start small. Spend carefully, meet people where they are. You can build your center of gravity over time and bring people to you when the time is right.
So your first developer relation hire is critical. And what that means is what Ubuntu did at the time was they hired a key person, key people that were well known and respected in the community. So by doing that, they gathered a lot of momentum based on that fact. And what we look at nowadays is by hiring the right person, the right team, sets your team up for success. And what I have seen in the last year or so is people going out and hiring 6, 10, 12 people all in one go, and not really having a strategic plan in place, and that kind of backfires. 10 months down the line, 12 months down the line, the company's going, what is this team doing? It's costing us money, they're flying everywhere. Let's just crash and burn, let's kill this team off. And that's not really the answer. So hiring a person or team of people, small to start off with, is far better than hiring a team of 10 or massive amounts of people and not really having a plan about it. It doesn't really work. So critical for me, I think, is the first key takeaway of hiring somebody that's actually able to guide and direct your team's direction.
Yeah, and grow you effectively. So now we do want to issue an official warning. This is not a call to go out and find the super coolest ninja rock star, unicorn, poop emoji, whatever champion. Champion, whatever buzzword is important today. Like, we're not suggesting that the most important thing is to try to find the person with the largest social following, etc. What we're suggesting is find someone who has the community's respect and who understands their values and can relate to them with common ground. So one of the reasons why Jeff Waugh was so successful in this campaign for Canonical was because he was known as the dude who would wake you up in the morning at LinuxConf AU in the dorms by screaming, "Good morning, freedom lovers!" Now, obviously, this is someone who appealed very well to a project that had its roots in Debian and to a bunch of folks who were excited about using Linux because they were excited about the idea of using free as in freedom software.
So, just to use my personal experience at Couchbase, what we've been doing is trying to actually align ourselves with different teams. And that means syncing with the company leaders to understand what they want to learn from the community, and for us to actually feed back into them what we need to learn from them. So what's been really successful for me and for our team is, to sync with the sales team, maybe it's monthly or bi-monthly, to understand if they've met any customers, how they would like to champion Couchbase. So I run Couchbase experts in communities. I'm always looking to meet new people, to champion our work, to go out and speak at conferences, or perhaps they're online on the forums and they're doing a lot of answers themselves rather than relying on the engineering team. So by providing that back to the organizations and the team internally in Couchbase, they get to learn who our community are. Feeding that back from the events that we're at, the feedback that we're getting on the booths or on the forums itself, feeding that back into product and engineering means we actually have a direct line actually fixing things or improving the experience for everybody, not just us, but for our community as well. I think the hardest thing for us as community managers and developer advocates is not only the external advocacy that we have to do, but a lot of the work that we actually should be doing is internal advocacy. Because a lot of the time people don't know what we're doing, and you can file all the reports and send all the newsletters internally. People still don't seem to know what we're doing, and they can't seem to always justify it or understand it. So I think syncing regularly makes a big difference, and explaining it over and over again in ways that they can understand and share and absorb makes things a lot smoother for everybody, and also safeguards your team, let's be honest, because then they know what you're doing.
And so last but not least, and obviously this is important feedback in any case, but again, if you're in a new product area, if you're in an area where you're trying to create a market, et cetera, the most important thing you can do, if you're casting a wide net to try and understand what sticks, to understand customer use cases, et cetera, you need to iterate quickly and thoughtfully. And it's very hard to do both of those things at the same time because thoughtfulness does not lend itself well to thinking quickly. So be able to change your strategy quickly at the beginning to make sure that you're doing something that's actually effective in reaching the developer audience you want to reach, but also don't do it in such a way where later you're going to find that you have messaging conflicts because potentially you've put out a message to developers that doesn't resonate with your future product direction. And you should know that because of your regular syncs with your management about where the company is going. So that is all the time we have. And as there is no end state, you can start by asking us questions during the break. We would be happy to see you there. And we hope you have enjoyed our presentation. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.